Surviving Reality contains explicit content full of snark and sarcasm that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Surviving Reality.
I'm Corey.
And I'm Carly. And today we are talking about the new Netflix 3-part documentary, Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey?
Cold Cuts, Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Natalia Grace. Different. Those are different things. Even though
I was going to say, red alert.
You did send me the trailer.
Natalia Grace is coming back for a part 3 in January.
And it's about time. This is just an annual post-Christmas, post-New Year's sort of haze that we get lost in, is the continuation of the insane story of the Curious Case of Natalia Grace.
It's kind of a tradition at this point.
I'm getting used to it. They did say that it was final, the final part. So they're really, I think they're done.
I don't believe it.
You don't think that this story has anywhere else to go after that?
How many documentaries have they created around the JonBenet Ramsey case?
A lot. There are several. Yeah, please do not get this one confused with any of the others. There is a multitude of them available.
I do not like how all of the different streaming services will just push whatever topic, so in this case, JonBenet Ramsey, anything that they have on her up to the top of your list, so that you then get confused about if this is the new thing that everyone's talking about, and then you discover it's like 5 years old.
It's the same thing that they used to do at Blockbuster back in the day. And then you'd have people coming in and complaining. Why?
An old strategy.
Because basically what would happen is there would be lesser production companies that would find out about bigger titles that are coming out. And then so they would make something that sounds kind of similar, vaguely adjacent, might be a Dahmer movie or a Dahmer documentary. And then everybody's got a Dahmer thing. That's what happened with the Netflix one too.
This is like the 4th or 5th time we've seen this happen. I think most recently it was with Scott Peterson.
Oh, that one too. Yeah. It happens all the time. Every single iteration. They're trying to catch that word of mouth. Did you hear about this? I was watching this show. And then they trick you into watching their crappy version of it.
Well, we watched the right thing, thank God.
Yeah, not Casting JonBenet. If you watched Casting JonBenet,
you're disappointed.
You are very upset. You should be, at least, because that was a stinker. That one sucked.
There are a lot of people who are not very happy about this documentary.
Okay, I think with the JonBenet case, it's whatever documentary that I've seen most recent. That's the theory that I'm going to go with.
Okay.
I think that's where I've landed.
I'm in a similar boat. I don't feel like I'm very easily swayed or impressionable, except when it comes to JonBenet Ramsey.
This case is a conundrum every single time.
I believe whatever I just most recently heard.
And I know from a documentary standpoint, because we were talking about this a little bit too, every documentary, especially ones that are kind of sensationalized for entertainment purposes, which I guess that's a disclaimer we should throw at the top of this. This review is for entertainment purposes only. I don't want
Burke
Ramsey suing me for defamation. This is for entertainment purposes only. I have zero true crime expertise or knowledge. So don't come at me. Cease and desists. Send them somewhere else. That being said, we watched the CBS one, which that is very controversial, from 2016. I think that was The Case of JonBenet Ramsey was the title of that one. And that was the one that really explored the topic of possibly Burke being responsible for the murder.
If you missed that one, there was a lot of talk about the pineapple that was eaten. There was the flashlight that was on the counter. They did the reenactment to try to prove that a 9 or 10-year-old child could strike another child with a flashlight and injure them to that extent.
I'm saying a lot of people were saying, yeah, it's impossible. There's no way. How could a 9-year-old boy do that? I don't think that is a reasonable enough example to cite to just say he was 9. I don't think he could, because that was kind of what they were disproving. Some of the evidence, though, that they did end up using for that didn't really match with it, but it did kind of convey at least some of the elements that they were trying to say it's a possibility. But they really leaned in on, it was Burke.
I'm at the point where I just don't believe reenactments.
Well, I've watched enough Forged in Fire on the History Channel to know that just because you strike something, ballistics gel dummy or a pig carcass isn't going to exactly respond the same way that a human body would, it does illustrate a lot of the same principles of how that would work mechanically and what that response would be. But if it's just something that's stationary there, it's not reacting, it's not responding, there's no muscle tensing or flexing that happens as
there's no response.
Protection against that, yes, there's going to be a lot of damage that's inflicted in those scenarios. So it's not an accurate representation 100% of what that capability would be, but I guess it's kind of a way to rule out if you weren't able to do it in that scenario, you probably wouldn't be able to do that in a human instance either.
I just haven't believed reenactments since the staircase. And I guess we should say that up front. I'm a bird theory person, so if you are wondering what my credibility is in the true crime space...
Specifically, owl raptor theory.
Correct.
You're going with the owl defense. Honestly,
I'm just going to frame it so that you know going into this what you're working with.
I think, yeah, and this is one of those things, too, where it's like when Making a Murderer came out, and people who actually went through and read the documents that were in the trial, there was some other stuff that was very obvious evidence that they kept out of the documentary to make you question this. So it removed a lot of that certainty and kept it more middle ground of did they or didn't they, to keep you engaged, to keep you watching the show. That's the basis of this. It's for entertainment purposes. So I think that calls into question the ethics of documentary filmmaking, which we were kind of talking about.
Which this documentary was made with the participation of John Ramsey and other Ramsey family members. So right away, it's pretty clear that we're not going to go into this and talk in depth about Burke being a plausible murderer, which is the most recent theory that I think has picked up traction over the years. He did not do himself many favors going on Dr. Phil.
Nobody does. Yeah, nobody does any favors going on Dr. Phil.
He had a strange affect during the interview. Everybody thought that he looked very guilty, questionable, strange. He had odd facial reactions. He was laughing at a lot of things.
Catch Me Outside, how about that? He didn't hit us with any of those. Even though Burke always has kind of carried that, I like my suitcase energy. If you're on TikTok and you know what I'm talking about. Does he not give Baron vibes? He's right in there.
He does.
It's the same speed.
I think it's just when a small child is that wealthy, they just have similar personalities.
They all start looking and acting like that.
Uh-huh.
That's it. That's just what happens.
We need a documentary investigating that.
That's a whole other theory. Yeah, we don't have time to explore.
So we've obviously grown up with the story of JonBenet Ramsey and have been influenced by the many stories and things over the years. So I think, do you want to talk about going into this, what we thought, and then the things that we found suspicious?
Your personal involvement with the case, if any? Where were you the night you found out about the JonBenet Ramsey murder?
I think I was probably in bed in my Minnie Mouse sheets.
Not your Beauty and the Beast sheets?
No, those were cute though.
Okay. I think my sister had that bedspread.
Oh my God.
So
everybody in the 90s
jarring.
had the same bedding.
Yeah. Because we all picked them out of the same Sears catalog. At Christmas time, you get it. On Thanksgiving, that was what you did. You went through and you circled all the stuff that you wanted.
Circling things out of catalogs is a lost art that used to bring so much joy.
Except it's kind of triggering for me because I remember always circling. There was one specific toy that I always wanted, and then I never got it.
Yeah, I never got an American Girl doll.
Yeah, there's some things that you just keep circling, and they just never show up.
So were we both in the camp of Burke did it before we watched this?
I always am open to new information. So that was why the last one with Burke, I was like, this is pretty convincing. But it turns out most of it was libel and slander. So that's why it was pretty convincing. It wasn't factually correct. So I was willing to, I'm not set in my ways. I'm not dug in on my stance here where it's no amount of evidence is going to change my mind. I don't pick theories and make that my identity. I will always look at new pieces of information and assess that against the rest of the information that's available. But that's why this case is so baffling to me, because every single time there is a valid candidate for who is possibly responsible for this, DNA evidence clears them every single time. So then I'm losing my mind with this. I don't know where else to go.
Well, the whole purpose of this documentary is to, I guess, try to get more voices involved in the conversation to push the Boulder Police Department to recollect DNA or retest existing DNA and then test it against genealogy platforms to see if they can find some type of connection.
Well, that's where we kind of end up. I thought it was funny that where we end up is every suspect should be brought back onto the table because the DNA is questionable that they've been testing, the ones that they do have the results from 1996, which I'm sure they did a real bang-up job getting those results too. But that was the main consensus was, hey, let's bring all of the suspects back into question. But then also, let's immediately rule out Burke. So it was just in the same breath when they're saying we should consider all avenues, but not Burke, though. So that was weird.
But it's not even just the Ramsey family who's saying not Burke. It was the DA's office who was clearing him, which then I felt conflicted because I don't know if I trust anything around the police work in this investigation.
Okay, so that calls into question because then you have the Boulder Police Department, which believed it was Patsy, and then the Boulder DA office, who thought it was an intruder. It was somebody outside of the family. So they were at odds, and that was why now you have these convincing cases on both sides because there were people who were set with, this is the answer, this is the solution, and I'm going to find all the evidence that supports my claim. It's the bias investigation that happens from that, and then that just builds up the narrative on both sides.
Shall we start at the beginning? For anyone who is unfamiliar with the JonBenet Ramsey case.
If you're still living under a rock at Mary's Rental in Flagstaff.
So JonBenet Ramsey is a 6-year-old beauty queen who's living in Boulder, Colorado with her parents. And she is murdered on December 26th. Well, they think it was the 25th.
It was like the night of Christmas, 1996.
Yes. The next morning, her parents wake up. Patsy goes downstairs and discovers that there's a ransom letter left on one of the stairs.
Letters, because it's 3 fucking pages long.
Okay, let's talk about that. The ransom letter.
This always bothered me.
Well, it's the piece that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think this was the thing that instantly directed people towards the parents.
This felt like cover-up.
First, the length. It seems that most detectives feel like this is extremely odd. Most ransom letters are pretty to the point.
It's a little wordy. Yeah. A little bit, to say the least. 3 pages? I mean, okay, so from the theory of an intruder, I would say the only way that an intruder would be able to come into this house, which apparently is 6,500 square feet. I did not know it was that large.
I have never realized. I knew it was a big house. I knew that they were wealthy. I didn't know that it was big enough to be a Robin rental.
It was windy. Yeah, I don't think there's enough bedrooms for it to be a Robin rental. But, I mean, they were referring to it as...
It's like a labyrinth. The police are absolutely convinced that there's no way any human who doesn't live in this house can navigate it on their own.
And that I believe, because we did the 3D walkthrough on it, and I was like, yep, I got all turned around too. But I would say, if it is an intruder, they got in there right when the family left on Christmas evening to go to their Christmas party, and then they got home. So they had maybe 4 or 5 hours in the house by themselves waiting for the family to come home. I think they were hiding in the house when they got home.
So now you're going with the intruder theory.
Well, I'm saying if it's an intruder theory, that is the only way that somebody would be able to navigate that home, is if they had 5 hours in this home by themselves to learn the layout of the home. Also, that's the only thing that's going to give you enough time to write a 2.5, 3-page ransom letter. But I don't know why you would be writing a kidnapping letter while you're there.
I'm going to blow your mind. I think this person was in the house for a lot longer than that.
You think
You're
it was
looking at
like
me like I'm crazy.
No. You think it was like I'm thinking of the other cases where that is a legitimate thing that has happened.
This house is so big that it is not crazy to think that somebody could have been in there for quite a period of time or could have come multiple times and felt very confident about their entrance and exit, and the fact that they had that much time to be in the house writing a ransom letter, because the notepad and the pen came from within the house. So the intruder or whomever wrote the ransom letter did it in the house.
There's no arguing with that. That is true. But now I'm starting to doubt too, because from the stuff that John Ramsey was saying in the first episode, where he had broken into their house, he had crawled in through the basement window, which is now the point of entry in the intruder theory, 6 months prior to this, and he thought that they had fixed that window, but it was still broken. How do you not know that you have a broken window in your basement for 6 months?
I thought that was really strange, especially because the kids were playing in that room.
That's like the train room where, they went down and played with toys. They have toys. They spend a lot of time down there with just a broken window in the basement.
Well, that's where I'm wondering, did they really spend a lot of time in that room? Or is that like they shoved the train set that nobody ever really looked at too much in there? Or I don't know. If they were, that's strange that you have a broken window in a room that your kids play in often.
I'm assuming it's pretty cold in Boulder, Colorado.
In December?
To have a broken window for 6 months. So the entire rest of the summer, fall, and then into basically the middle of winter.
Well, and the fact that it's dangerous, because we did see that in the crime scene photos, there was a piece of glass that had seemed to have dislodged from this broken window.
I mean, I'm surprised that their basement wasn't completely overrun by raccoons or squirrels. Maybe
well, this has the grate.
Maybe there is an owl theory that could come into play now with this as well. I'm not ruling it out.
That did seem off, the thing about the window being broken for a long period of time. But also, if you were looking to break into a home and you've somehow spotted that this window is broken, and these people seem to not have any interest in fixing it for 6 months at a time, does that give more credence to the idea that somebody maybe could have repeatedly entered into this house? Also, the fact that they just do not pay attention to anything.
That, I think, lends the most credence to your theory then, is I feel like if you have a broken window in your basement for 6 months, I don't know if you would notice somebody coming in and out of your house at that frequency.
There you go.
That's what I'm saying is I can get on board with that.
It seems a little oblivious.
Definitely.
So the argument that there's no way that someone could have easily learned how to navigate this home, I think we throw that out.
The crime scene photos of the grates when they're lifting up the grate to get to the window, and then they had closed the grate and there was vegetation that was then pressed between the grate and the concrete. It doesn't grow like that, so there was definitely an interruption that had happened. It was opened and then closed as the person left.
We do know, though, that John Ramsey had to go down there to break that window 6 months prior. So you could argue, did vegetation get stuck under the grate from that incident?
Depends on when
and continue to grow?
Yeah, depends on when it grew.
I'm going to poke holes in the theories from both directions.
I know, right? Yeah. So, I mean, this is where it gets tough.
The letter. The other strange thing is the ransom amount that's requested. And I think this has been a thing that has stuck in people's minds that doesn't really make sense to me as pointing to the Ramseys, which was that they asked for $118,000, which is not an even amount of money. It's also coincidentally very close to the figure that John Ramsey was receiving as a bonus for Christmas.
So your theory is with the extended intruder theory that they've been in the house, that they're just hiding out and hanging out to. Maybe they heard somebody mention that in passing and knows about that amount, or was going through papers or something.
Yeah, I would think that if I was receiving a bonus of $118,000, we would probably be talking about it in our own home. I would also probably be pretty eager to know when the $118,000 was going to hit my account. So I feel like it would be spoken about quite a bit.
Okay, yeah. I don't know if you and Patsy have the same temperament, though. I don't know if Patsy's going to be asking about it as much. She wasn't asking about a broken window in the basement for 6 months, so
true.
She let that slide.
It's just odd because wouldn't that so easily point to you?
To me? I don't want to be involved in this.
The Ramseys know what they're going to be receiving from John's company. Why would you write that exact amount of money? Well, virtually exact amount of money. That's the other thing that made me suspicious, because they said it was like $118,000 and was it like $700 and change? It was something strange at the end. If you were casually having a conversation about that at home, you would never say the exact figure.
Just roughly.
I think that would be odd.
118,000. I mean, I guess that way it kind of opens it up as, is it somebody who did business with John, who knew, who worked with him, who was close to him in business ties? So I think it opens the door for those types of theories too, to sprawl out from the suspect list of who knew that John would be getting that amount as a bonus from work. Was it one of his employees or disgruntled people who were upset with him too?
I've actually never heard anyone explore that piece of it.
Oh, I thought they did in the 2016 one. I feel like that was a piece of it, but
maybe
they kind of glossed over that. The thing that gets me about the ransom note from the 2016 doc that we watched was how many movie quotes were in this, because obviously that deeply resonated with me.
They skipped that entirely in this one. So let's talk more about that.
They didn't call that out at all, because the interesting thing is that there were a lot of movie posters in the basement. So there are films that John Ramsey is a fan of, that he had enough of a fandom for that he bought the posters for them and then had them in the basement, stored them on display. You can see them in the police walkthrough footage, and that was what they were showing. There are some of those movies that have a kidnapping component as part of their storyline, and they put them up side by side with the wording and the phrasing that's used in the ransom note as well. And it's exactly the same phrasing in a lot of circumstances. So that's an odd comparison point, but that lends credence to your extended intruder theory as well.
You think they were watching their movies and trolling them by including quotes in their ransom letter?
If you're in another room and you're hearing John Ramsey watch this movie for the 18th time and you know that movie, then maybe that is a way to kind of throw that in there. And then, I don't know, how did John not make that connection? Why didn't any of that sound familiar to him?
Well, devil's advocate, if Patsy and John wrote this letter together, are these quotes that are just kind of subliminally in John's mind?
That's why it felt more like cover up. It felt like something had accidentally happened. And then, I mean, that was where my brain logically went to, of what is the scenario that we can tie it to?
Let's talk about the extreme, though, of something bad happens and you go straight to covering it up as a kidnapping and a sexual assault.
Yeah, it's odd to go that route.
That seems like a little much, versus most people would just call the police and say something happened that was in the realm of an accident.
Yeah, make sure you say accident on the 911 call.
And they would later disprove it or try to disprove that that's what happened. But the whole staging a kidnapping seems like a lot. It's a lot of work. It's a little extreme. I'm not sure I buy into that.
Here's my other thing that bothers me about the Burke theory. Everybody was so set on testing Patsy and John's handwriting. Nobody tested Burke's. I really wanted to see what Burke's handwriting was at that time, at that age.
Do you think a 9-year-old has the endurance to write a 3-page letter?
No, I think he got really tired throughout it. And it was dictated to him by his parents, and they kept him at it. See, once you start going through the explanation of things, it starts to reveal how ridiculous this sounds.
I remember hearing it was very sure that Patsy's handwriting matched the letter.
There was a lot of tabloid headlines that were very convinced.
But that is not, in fact, true. Multiple handwriting experts have said that they did not, in fact, match. And I'm pretty sure that handwriting evidence is one of those things that is not always super reliable.
Yeah, it's like teeth marks. Can't really judge based on that. It's not fingerprints.
I will say the way she writes a D was very similar, a lowercase d, to what was in the letter. Should I call it a letter? It's a ransom note.
It's a ransom note. Well, at 3 pages, when does a note become a letter? I don't know.
Fair.
We can't get into the whole science of that.
Patsy calls the police. The letter says, "Do not call the police."
And so John's immediate response is call the police. He makes Patsy call the police, though.
She does sound very frantic in the 911 recording.
And that's something that I remember from the 2016 one, was that she was calm before they picked up the 911 call, because 911 starts recording the line from the moment that your phone connects, not from the moment when the operator picks up. So it was quiet for the first bit, and then as soon as someone picks up, then she gets frantic. So that was another suspicion thing that they were pointing to in the 2016 documentary.
I have seen enough true crime docs where they point to the 911 recording as some type of evidence of someone's guilt, and they are completely innocent. But it's the way people react in these types of situations that people, for some reason, judge how you should or shouldn't react in a situation that you've probably never experienced yourself.
In traumatic or very stressful, shocking sort of scenarios too. So like, I think we can throw all that out. That's all speculation of assuming how someone should be reacting, should be responding. You don't know.
The first officer that responds shows up and is like, are you sure she didn't run away?
She's 6. She might be getting cast in things that you guys don't even know about. She might have a whole career, and she might have just legged it out to Hollywood, you know?
That was my first red flag, that we are not listening to this police department, because this is 1970 type behavior with responding to a missing young female and saying they ran away.
I heard a lot
Case
of people.
closed.
Yeah, I heard a lot of people have been going out to the Manson farm. So I don't know. She might be out there.
It's Christmas night. She ran away?
Well, this is the morning. Yeah, she must have not gotten a life-size Barbie.
She did get a life-size Barbie.
She
I
did.
saw that.
Oh, my
I clocked
size.
that.
A my size Barbie,
My-size
not
Barbie.
life-size. Yeah. That's the Tyra Banks movie.
That is a good movie.
That's different cinema. I don't think they had that movie poster in the basement. But Boulder PD, the hits just keep on coming. They do not close this down as a crime scene. They invite everyone that they know in town over to come trample through the house. They're treating it like a kidnapping, even though you should suspect that maybe there's some crime afoot. Shouldn't that be your initial response as a police officer, perhaps?
Nah, you know what would be really helpful? If you guys could start combing through all of the rooms. If you could do my job for me.
You know what? We did a quick once over of the house, but we don't really know all the nooks and crannies here. We got a little turned around.
This house is confusing.
I'll be honest. I didn't look in all the rooms. So if you guys could just give it a quick flyby, just maybe prop open some doors so that way we know that they are accessible. I started to think, who was that police officer with the crazy eyes? That lady police officer.
I do not trust anything that she says.
She was talking some paranoia crazy stuff about sending John Ramsey down to go look around because I guess she was sick of being in the same room as him. And so she sent him to go look around. If that makes you feel better, sure. And he went straight to the basement and then found JonBenet, and her body she was in the basement, tucked away.
In the train room.
Well, like off from the train room. So his response, he panics. He then starts interacting with the body, brings her upstairs. They didn't even mention this part in this documentary, but I think he brought her up and set her like in the entryway of the house or like on the couch in the living room where everybody's been.
I think they put her on the floor by the Christmas tree in the living room. But correct,
where
in
everybody,
a room that all of these people who had been invited over had been walking through.
High traffic area that she has passed through. This lady cop starts counting the bullets in her gun because she doesn't know. She now thinks she's in a room full of murderers. And so she's going to have to shoot her way out of here, I guess.
I don't know. It became an Agatha Christie novel all of a sudden for her. What?
I think, yeah, can we do a quick just psych evaluation of this officer?
Multiple officers who were part of this investigation.
Well, I think there's a difference between being crazy and being inept.
Okay.
And I think a lot of them were inept, but this one was crazy. This lady was crazy.
I mean, you saw it in her eyes.
How could you not?
This police department has no experience with responding to murders, which is probably why most of this happened, even though that's maybe something that you get trained for, that you talk about, that you prepare for the day that this town actually has a murder, that maybe you just learned from other investigations. No?
I don't think so. No. Yeah, this was their first homicide of the year, and it was on December 26th that year.
Well, I guess the last one. Oh, first of the year at the end of the year.
At the end of the year. Yeah, there was only 5 days left in the year.
Almost had a year clear.
So close.
Very, very, very close. This cop thinks it's very odd that John went straight down to the room that she was in.
That JonBenet was in. Yeah, he found her immediately. He didn't even go anywhere else. It was just a straight shot right down there. So he knew. He knew where she was the whole time. That becomes the police officer's theory.
Now, I have another argument here. If you have carefully crafted a scene, why would you be the one to go disturb what you have set up? Why would you not leave it there, everything in place, and then yell that you have located her?
Because now we're changing up, so if we're going to go down that route, then I think that would be move her body up, contaminate the scene, basically. So
All
then
right.
that becomes the goal.
It's 1996. I don't think that people have that much of an understanding of true crime and what can be found at a crime scene to know that that's what they, quote, need to do in order to cover up a crime. Also, I would say the things he did seem pretty reasonable, that you found your child, you don't know that they're dead yet, you find tape over her mouth, you remove the tape. You see that there's something around her hands, you try to remove that. You bring her upstairs to where you think that they may be able to help her. It was pretty obvious that she had passed away, and they confirm that when they bring her back upstairs. But I'm not sure that that all is super suspicious. I feel like that's more circumstantial evidence, which I don't even know you could say is evidence because, again, you're relying on how somebody's going to react in a situation.
Yeah, he would not be the first person who would be doing things that you're not supposed to be doing at a crime scene as a reactive parent who's kind of freaking out in that process. I don't think that that is outside of the norm for that type of reaction. But people who are trying to attribute this to nefarious motives, then they're looking at it through that lens and they're seeing there's a whole bigger problem here. So that's when the police department kind of makes their decision. Well, maybe not that early, but at some point, the Ramseys get kind of a tip where, hey, heads up, the police aren't your friends. They are trying to build a case that proves that you guys are involved in this. They're leaking information to local media outlets and stupid journalists who aren't doing any sort of due diligence for their sources.
The first guy, I don't remember what his name was. John B., something like that.
Oh, I thought it was Charles something.
Charles? I don't know.
Terrible at his job.
Yes, very bad at his job. He is the one who wrote the article that first talked about how there was no footprints in the snow outside of the house, which was something that was communicated to him by insiders in the investigation because that points to nobody came into or out of the home. So it's a way to say you suspect the parents without saying it outright.
And as it turns out, there was no snow in the backyard.
I was so mad when I saw those pictures. I have seen many things about this case since 1996, and I was under the impression that there were 6 inches of snow outside of that house, the way they talked about it.
I mean, there was snow in the front yard.
There was snow that had been, it looked like it had melted, it had frozen again.
Well, that's what I thought too. I was like, oh, is that why there weren't footprints? Is not even fresh snow to cover it, but was there snow there and then it melted subsequently and they didn't see that?
There is a ton of exposed grass. The entire backyard, the entire area where the broken window is, no snow, all completely uncovered. So the idea that they would have had footprints is absurd to begin with.
Hard to have footprints when you don't have snow.
So it seems like, yes, they decided very early on that whomever was in the house, someone had done it.
Well, here's the kicker too, is that there is a footprint And it's inside on the suitcase.
Underneath the window.
Underneath the window that you would have to hop and hoist yourself out of. But they didn't seem to really care about that one. Why don't we look at that one?
Did this person weigh like 75 pounds if they hoisted themselves up on that suitcase?
Well, we saw some of the suspects later on.
That one guy was...
Slender man.
John Mark Carr.
He's got a very...
slender figure. Slender man. Let's talk about Slender man.
He's got a Plath build. A Barry Plath type. But... Season 1 Barry Plath, before he started hitting the gym and he bulked up.
There are suspicions about Barry Plath, so.
He is a slender man.
This suitcase looked a little odd to me. Doesn't seem like something that's sturdy enough to stand up on.
I like my suitcase. It's different. It's different, though.
I will agree that looked a little planted.
It looked planted by whom? It's like staging the scene?
Yeah, it looked strange. I feel like I would knock a suitcase over trying to stand up on it just to get myself out a window. It would make a lot of noise.
It looked like a necessary component to have someone get out of that window. And there's no way to move it after you're up and out.
Well, of course. Well, then I feel like it, again, did this person come in and out of this house multiple times and this was the way they got themselves in and out? Because I could also see the Ramseys never noticing that the suitcase had been placed there.
Yeah, that seems like a system that has been enacted for repeated use.
Just before I put my full body weight on any object, if I'm trying to make sure that no one in the house is disturbed and will be alerted to the fact that I'm trying to escape from a home after committing a murder, I don't think I would step on a suitcase without having tested it out before first.
Well, I don't think anything was done in haste in this case at all. Everything was very... there was no rush here at all.
I don't agree that they make it seem like that, though. It feels as though the police department, if there was an intruder, that the theory seems to be somebody broke in. They were in the house for maybe a couple of hours. They hastily wrote this crazy letter that makes no sense. They're using objects from inside the home to create a garrote.
I think from the police standpoint, if they're saying intruder and why they're casting that out immediately is because they're thinking of like the cat burglar type crime that's taking place here in their minds, where it's nighttime, everyone has gone to sleep, and now this person is going to enter into the building undetected and then do whatever nefarious things they're here to do and then escape. And that's what they're trying to rule out, is because they couldn't even navigate their way around this house in broad daylight. So I don't think somebody who's unfamiliar with the space as an intruder, outside intruder, is going to be able to do that. But if you're taking it into the theory of they were there way before when the family had left and they were waiting and hiding, that gives you hours, time to kill.
Somebody who was stalking them. There are brazen people who do not wait until the veil of night to come into a home.
And that's an escalation thing too, is because then it's the intrusion becomes part of the thrill. And that's where that escalates, is because the behavior just keeps getting more and more intrusive until you have an encounter.
Well, too bad. We're moving on from that because it was definitely the Ramseys.
Wait, you're saying the suitcase?
Police.
Oh, the
police. They have decided that they are going to start using the media to place pressure on the family.
Yeah, because now this is their best bet, because it's going to be a team of Boulder police officers who would have zero homicide experience, and they would need to find a random intruder with no other motive outside of this. They have no idea, no leads, nothing to go off of. So they need to solve this pretty quick. Let's just apply some pressure and see if anybody confesses. See if anybody will confess under duress.
And of course, this case becomes a media sensation because as soon as the pictures of JonBenet in beauty pageants start getting released and the videos, first of all, this is an amazing case for the 24-hour news cycle. There are so many pictures and so many videos of her for them to play over and over and over again.
There's so much content.
And people start seeing these images who are not familiar with child beauty pageants, and they're weirded out.
As they should be.
Because here is a 6-year-old girl who looks like a tiny adult.
Like a tiny supermodel.
And people start questioning, why would her parents dress her up like this? Why is she dancing around? Why is she participating in something like this? It gets a little slut-shamey towards a child.
Towards a 6-year-old. And in a lot of those videos, even younger than that, the commentary that they had people popping off with in the 90s, wow.
The woman talking about the saxophone, which was a video from a few days before JonBenet had passed.
Well, that was on Geraldo, so I mean, take that with a grain of salt.
Well, I think people took a while to figure out that Geraldo maybe wasn't top quality journalism.
With a mustache like that, you know you can trust what he's saying.
She's talking about how JonBenet is masturbating with the saxophone, and they show the video in this documentary nowhere near her body.
No, she's imitating playing a saxophone because...
It's Lisa Simpson playing a saxophone.
And it's like a synchronized bit. She's lip syncing saxophone playing that's happening.
While dressed as an elf. It's far from what this woman was making it out to be.
This is where a lot of people start to bring their own interpretations into the theories that happen. And it's a lot of individuals' experiences that then get cast and portrayed onto this. This is where it gets very confusing. Everybody has their take. Everybody has an assessment.
Are you talking about the beauty queen from like 1950 who talked about how she had been assaulted within her family?
Yes. I mean, that was part of it. But I mean, just in general, in all of these theories, every single theory that comes out for this is just another spin-off of somebody else's take and adaptation of their situation being applied to these scenes.
The real bullshit of this whole thing is that while the media is going wild, attacking these parents for every decision that they have ever made in raising this 6-year-old child, while they're being pressured to do interviews when they're not talking to the police.
A reminder, it's not a crime to not talk to the police.
Let's stick on that for a moment.
Any lawyer is going to tell you, don't talk to the police.
If you have hired an attorney and they're like, sure, go in there and talk to the police department, that's perfectly fine. You need to get another lawyer.
That's what happened to Martha. She went in for the questioning. They said, hey, if you don't remember, just say you don't remember. Then they got her. So, yeah, don't go talk to him. Don't talk.
Don't talk to cops. That is the number one rule your attorney should tell you. I don't think that makes them guilty.
No, it absolutely does not. Especially when you are being informed, hey, they have an agenda. They have you as the suspect. That is when you absolutely need to stop talking to the police.
Which, something else we find out, they have reviewed the DNA evidence that they had collected on the scene. And they tested it against Patsy and John and Burke and multiple family members, extended family members. Their DNA does not match what they found underneath her fingernails or in her underwear. And yet they're not telling the media that, the police.
Correct. Yeah, they're not sharing that information. They're sharing a whole bunch of other information.
That makes them look guilty as fuck.
That is just to twist the screws and add more pressure and drive them to a wildly inaccurate confession.
The most prevalent theory at first is that Patsy is the one who killed JonBenet in a fit of rage because JonBenet had been wetting the bed.
This is one that Boulder PD really went in on at the time of the investigation. And this is probably the easiest one to dispute and dismiss as not credible. So I don't know why they stuck with that so much.
At one point, one of the detectives releases a book about how Patsy is guilty.
It's still an active investigation, technically. So that's what they were saying. That's a faux pas in and of itself.
Also, why are you trying to make money off of an open investigation?
This is when I start suspecting police officers. Crazy Eyes and who was it? The guy who wrote the book, Steve Z? What's his name? Steve something? Because from all of these crimes that have been solved through the public database, DNA profiles that are available and stuff like that, a lot of them have been people in law enforcement.
That's true. Well, and a lot of breaking and entering like that, where you're sneaking around covertly in the middle of the night. A lot of time, it's people who have a law enforcement or a military background.
It's true.
Or at least for people who have done that repeatedly, because they're the ones not getting caught.
Right. But this is where I get so confused. The DNA stuff, because then they're using the DNA to say, Oh, okay. You're cleared. You're excluded.
Except for the Ramseys.
Well, the Ramseys,
they never cleared them, even though their DNA didn't match.
Except Burke, because then they said, oh, you went too far.
Well, that took until like recently.
Yeah, very much so. But I think this is the problem that I have is then every valid candidate that we potentially have, every suspect that comes into the picture here, everybody's always ruled out by the DNA. But they said that they've only tested a couple of items, and then there are more items that they could test because there was like some rope that was left in a guest bedroom that the Ramseys have no idea that was not their rope. So somebody brought that into the house. To be fair, I don't think they're doing an inventory checklist of what's being brought into their house, in and out. Seems like they have some staff. It was around the holidays,
maybe
too.
Not very observant people.
Not as observant, and maybe they don't really know exactly what's going on with every inch of their house.
All 6,500 square feet.
Yeah, I mean, I can't blame them. But test the stuff that you do have. Test the other things that are odd, that don't make sense in this, to see if maybe we can pull something that would lead into that direction, something of an intruder, or get us closer to somebody who was there, somebody who was involved.
It's wild to me that they haven't done that already, and that they're continuing to use the samples from 1996.
That's what I'm concerned about too, because I think a lot of the DNA testing, that's what they were concerned about, is it used to be a very permanent, damaging process. You had to destroy the sample in order to test it for those earlier tests that they had when it came to DNA testing, from what I know from watching Forensic Files. Sometimes it's hard to tell what year it is because the ones from 1986 look like the same episodes as the one they released in 2020. So it's hard to tell.
One of the other things that doesn't get talked about that I thought was mind-blowing in this documentary was the other girl who also attended JonBenet's dance studio, who had someone break into her home and attempt to molest her in the middle of the night.
That seems like a connection point. That seems like very similar MO.
Like that's odd.
And
right?
a coincidence that it was the same person, because then that's where people start pointing out a lot of the moms in the pageant world noticed that there were a few different people, because this is when we start exploring some of the outside the family suspects that people have posited over the years. And there were people who were attending these pageants who were not there because they had any children involved. They were there just to spectate.
There were like 4 extra suspects that we talked about. Or was it 3? There were 3.
There was like 3 or 4.
There was the photographer, Randy.
Yes. And he had some questionable photos that were there. And he was usually at those pageants. So he could be involved.
He was later arrested for having child sexual assault material. There was John Brewer Eustace. Did I say that right?
I don't know. John Eustace is all I wrote down. I didn't do the middle name. It's not a John Wayne Gacy level for me.
Okay.
Even though there was a garrote.
He was like a transient person who at one point they thought it could have been also cleared by DNA. And then...
No, that was Gary. Did you mix up the names?
There's someone named Gary?
Gary Oliva.
Oh, I missed
I think
him.
that was the photographer. The photographer was Randy Simmons.
Yeah.
Simon. Not Richard Simmons. Oh my God, Richard Simmons getting thrown into the mix. Do not tarnish his legacy.
Oh my God. Well, the one we spend the most time talking about is known secretly as Daxus. And he goes on sending emails, making phone calls, talking in depth about the crime.
But this is the injustice that was served by the Boulder Police Department. They leaked so much information to the press that there are so many details that are now public knowledge, public information about this case. It's going to be very difficult to find someone who doesn't have access to that information.
At this point, I don't know if we even know if they have anything additional that is a secret.
I didn't know about the rope.
Well, now you do.
Now we do. So, yeah, I mean, there has to be some other smaller details like that then, probably. And they just keep going with whatever else they can share about it. And I think they're just using that now to push for the DNA. Because if you get the DNA testing and you're able to do that, you should be able to come back with a match on something.
I will say that the story that he tells seems very plausible. He explains why he left the ransom note.
Daxus does?
Yes, that's John Mark Carr.
Yes.
Spoiler alert for everybody.
And other spoiler alert, on top of the spoiler alert, it's not him. He's cleared because of DNA evidence too. I don't understand. His story doesn't make sense.
Why don't you think it makes sense?
I'm saying from like the intruder type standpoint. He was talking about it like it was a relationship, like they had an ongoing...
Yeah, haven't you seen... That's not unusual if somebody especially is exhibiting stalker-like behavior. A lot of times they come up with these fantasy relationships that are not real.
I know. I've seen 1 Hour Photo. I know. I'm very familiar with the lore.
It felt to me like that's what he was explaining.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying is like from the timeline or the storyline, though, it didn't seem like this was a one-off thing. Like this seemed like this was something that he was doing regularly with her, and I don't know where he would have that access to her. This sounded like more than one instance, so I don't know if he's taking other experiences that he had with other kids and then is applying that to her, or I don't know. Something just seemed like it didn't line up.
Is it all just a fantasy until it escalated to the point that it did?
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like, it doesn't seem like...
I just don't think you can apply logic and reason to this type of situation.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying
is
is from the timeline of the events that he is listing, that he is describing.
Yeah.
I don't think that happened in the couple hours that they spent together that Christmas night then. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's so gross.
I'm just like...
I know that you're mocking him.
The amount of stuff that he's talking about that's happening, I don't think that took place in that brief encounter that they did have if he was there for that one night. This seems like it's either a longer spread out thing or he's coming up with a whole bunch of bullshit.
It's probably the latter.
It's probably a whole bunch of bullshit because the DNA rules him out too. But this is what's so frustrating.
But could a broken clock be right twice a day? In that maybe when he's explaining the ransom letter, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to a lot of people. Why would you leave a ransom note, but then they find her deceased in the basement?
Because it was an accident. Yeah, it was a whoopsie-doopsie.
Well, he kind of explained it like he was intending to kidnap her at first.
But kids are a lot of responsibility, and is that what you're getting at?
I'm getting at, I could see how someone could leave a ransom note, and then before they actually leave the house, something occurs, and they do not leave with the intended person that they attempted to take out of the house.
Then why leave the note?
You think they should go back upstairs and pick it back up and take it with them?
Isn't that weirder to leave the note up there before you're going to kidnap her?
I guess you're taking the chance that somebody could come downstairs and find it before you've actually left the home.
That doesn't make any fucking sense.
All right, so we're putting more holes in the theory.
I know, that's what I'm saying. It's like, that doesn't make sense either.
Either way, somebody left a ransom note.
Yes, and
so
there was the false start ransom note too, because on the legal pad that they were testing the handwriting out, they found the Mr. and Mrs.
and
note
then changed it
beginning.
to Mr. Ramsey.
It was addressing it to Mr. Ramsey. That was all public knowledge though, so he could have spun that whole excuse. Because that doesn't make any sense why you would write a 3-page note while you're bored and waiting for them to come home and then place them at the bottom step of the stairs before you go up and take this kid out of her bed and then take her down into the basement. That doesn't make any sense. The timeline doesn't add up.
Well, we do apparently know that it was not John Mark Carr because, like you said, they're saying the DNA is not pointing to him.
They need to test the other stuff. They need better DNA samples because if it was Boulder PD who did the DNA test, I think we can throw out all of these results from everything forever.
Well, that's kind of what they're talking about towards the end of the documentary.
Bring everybody back onto the table except for Burke. Because he definitely didn't.
To that point,
I'm not ruling anybody out.
If John Ramsey was involved or knows who committed this crime, why would he push to collect more DNA and do more testing when this has gone cold? It's a cold case.
Because he's an old man and he wouldn't make it through a trial anyway. So at this point, it's kind of whatever. I don't know. It's the theories that people would come up with. Did you believe it was Patsy at the time? when it first came out?
Well, I think it's a little unfair to ask what I believed or didn't believe because I was a child.
Well, yeah. But I mean, you had opinions as a child, didn't you?
I was listening to the same media that everybody else was hearing, which
Nancy
was that
Grace.
Nancy Grace.
She was yelling all kinds of stuff.
I did think that Patsy was angry about her wetting the bed a long time ago. They proved that she didn't even have new sheets on the bed. So explain that.
The bed wasn't wet. She hadn't wet the bed either. So
no, I don't really get why Steve Thomas, was that his name?
Rob Thomas, Matchbox 20.
I don't know why he wouldn't let go of that theory.
Yeah, he was really all in on that and then not moving away from that, not entertaining anything else, because I think it would be a lot more work for him to find somebody outside of the family. And if those aren't solved within 48 hours, they're never going to be solved statistically.
Even if they didn't test Burke's DNA, though, if they retested Patsy and John's, they could still pick up a DNA profile if it was to like match. Part of it would match to the DNA if it had been Burke's DNA.
Yeah, just anybody in the family, they would connect on that point.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, even if they're going to say, oh no, like, but not Burke, don't look at Burke. Still, because of how DNA works, you are still somewhat looking at Burke.
I get what you're saying.
Even if it's not directly.
But that's why the Burke theory did take on some credence for me after watching that skewed, biased 2016 documentary too, was it seemed like it was more of a parent protection thing. You had your child who passed away from a terrible accident, fit of rage here that happened. So protect the kid because we don't want to lose custody. They were going in depth about Patsy's cancer diagnosis and how she had recovered from that. She was in remission, so she was savoring all this time with her kids and that she wanted to explore that more. It seemed like she didn't want to lose Burke. If he did do something, you would run the risk of potentially losing your only other kid. So I could see that as a motivation.
That is the argument from people who believe that they did something to cover up.
From a theory. So if Burke did it as an accidental thing and then they covered it up as the parents.
But then Burke never does anything again in his life that is remotely violent. He's a psychopath at the age of 9 and then goes on to live what appears to be a relatively normal life aside from being a strange bird.
I mean, he is a strange bird, but I think that would be a fit of rage when he is that age. I don't think that would be...
I just don't know how that's been kept quiet for so long.
Well, that was the crazy thing. And no, and it's not like he gets satisfaction out of it. I feel like now there's a bunch of theories that are cross-contaminating now. It's not that he found some sick enjoyment out of this. This was just an
accident that then was covered up.
A reaction that was an accident.
Well, but again, a weird way to cover up
very much
an accident like that.
Yes, I agree with that.
Extreme.
And risky too.
Yeah.
With your own handwriting, with your specific details about your Christmas bonus, it's just odd. It's not a great look.
That is why I think this case is going to continue to be talked about for a very long time.
Until they finally do some DNA testing. I guess Steve's just waiting for his book to become a New York Times #1 bestseller again. So then that way he's done cashing in on it, and then they'll be able to do a little bit more work.
Then they can disprove his theory.
All of the theories outright immediately.
I hope that we eventually get an answer to this.
I've been waiting so long at this point.
You personally have?
Me personally,
yeah.
I watched way too much of the news coverage when this was going on. Unsupervised in my living room too, by the way. I don't know where my parents were.
I just think that if John Ramsey was not involved, this man's 80 years old. I think he deserves to at least see them try to test some DNA again in his lifetime.
I think that's literally the least they can do. So hopefully this calls attention to it. This brings some sort of action that comes from it. And then we can see a resolution of some kind, because I'm starting to doubt the DNA.
Look, I'm going to make a prediction. I think the police department waits until he dies and then they do the DNA testing. I think that there's a lot of bad blood between them. I think the fact that there were so many lawsuits where the Ramseys ended up with money for suing people, various, including the police department, for things that were done wrong. I don't think that makes you friends in situations like this. And I wouldn't be surprised if something unfortunately happens like that, and then they solve this, and neither of these parents ever knew the answer and went to the grave wondering who killed their daughter. Cue all the people screaming because they're saying, well, they know who did it because it was them.
Right. Yeah, of course.
I was in that camp for a really long time, but I got to tell you, if I was on a jury, I would not be able to convict them.
I wouldn't be able to. No. We need better DNA evidence. That I agree. I think everybody on every side with every single theory can agree.
Well, except for the police who have the DNA.
Yes.
And won't test it.
And that's the problem because they messed up. They would know because that would look real bad if they run that through the public database and it hits on some rando who actually was involved and they can tie it back to this. That's going to look really bad for Boulder PD.
Any other thoughts?
I don't think so.
See if you had a closing argument. I don't know.
No, I don't think I had anything else to posit here.
Well, if you're on the Discord over on Patreon, let us know what you guys thought after you watched this or after listening to the pod.
Or if you remember the 2016 doc, if you saw that too.
You can't watch it anymore unless you pay for it.
It's tougher to find, but it's out there.
CBS is trying to make their money back from all the money they owe Burke.
Yeah, what, $750 million? And whatever they
settled for something. I'm sure it was a lot less.
Substantial.
Before we sign off here, quick reminder that this week's Housewives episode is going to drop a day later because of Thanksgiving.
So keep an eye out for that. Saturday on the public feed, Friday on the Patreon.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.